The ocean breathes. It sighs beneath the weight of centuries, whispering secrets to those who dare to listen. Today, the great whales glide through the blue, gentle titans, their songs weaving through the deep like threads of light. But once, long before their time, the seas belonged to monsters. Not the sleek, graceful leviathans of today, but beasts of jagged teeth and serpentine fury. Among them, none inspired more terror than Basilosaurus, the king lizard. A misnomer, for it was no reptile, but a whale of another age. A whale with the soul of a predator. Imagine it. 40 feet of coiled muscle, its body a whip of hunger. Its jaws, lined with dagger-like teeth, could crush bone with ease. Where modern whales sing, Basilosaurus would have screamed. A sound like splitting rock, a declaration of dominion. The oceans of the Eocene were warmer then, shallower, thick with life, and ripe for slaughter. Basilosaurus ruled them all. It hunted the ancestors of dolphins, tore into schools of fish like a storm through reeds. Its very presence warped the ecosystem around it, a force of nature given flesh. Yet now its bones lie buried beneath deserts, in places where water once roared. The world changed, the seas cooled, the king fell. But in the dark, beneath the silt and stone, something remembers. The story of the whale begins not in the sea, but on land. 50 million years ago, the world was a patchwork of dense forests and sprawling wetlands. The air hummed with insects, the earth trembled under the footfalls of early mammals, small, cautious creatures still shaking off the shadow of the dinosaurs. Among them, one unassuming family would embark on a journey unlike any other. The Pachycetids. They were no giants, no bigger than a modern wolf, with slender legs and hooves clicking against riverbanks. Their eyes, set high on narrow skulls, scanned the water's edge not as swimmers, but as hunters. Pachycetus, the first whisper of what was to come. It's not the size that matters, Dr. Lyra Voss murmured, brushing dust from a fossilized jaw in her cramped university lab. It's the teeth. She held the specimen to the light, tracing the sharp cusps designed for gripping flesh. See these. They're built for fish. For snapping, not chewing. This was a creature learning to switch its loyalty from land to water. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, a rhythm as old as time. The transition was slow, a dance of necessity. As competition grew fiercer on land, the ancestors of whales found refuge in the shallows. Rivers and estuaries became their new hunting grounds. Over generations, their bodies changed. Feet broadened into paddles, tails strengthened for propulsion, nostrils crept backward towards the top of the skull. Ambulocetus, the walking whale, emerged next. A predator built like a crocodile, its powerful limbs could still haul itself onto land, but its spine flexed with the undulations of a swimmer. It lurked in brackish waters, ambushing prey with a lunge that sent waves crashing. Dr. Voss's fingers hovered over a reconstruction of its skeleton. Imagine it, she said to her assistant, a young man scribbling notes. Not quite land, not quite sea, a thing caught between worlds, evolving in the in-between. And then, the sea called louder. The protocetids came next, whales that ventured deeper, their hind limbs weakening, their bodies streamlining like arrows shot into the waves. They breathed air, but their hearts beat for the ocean. Somewhere in the murk of time, a line was crossed. A creature took its last step onshore and never returned. The water had claimed its own. The ocean did not welcome its new rulers gently. It demanded sacrifice. Limbs once built for running, twisted into flippers, useless on land, but perfect for cutting through the water with silent precision. Nostrils, once perched at the snout's tip, crawled backward, rising like periscopes to the top of the skull. Blowholes, a simple shift, yet one that meant the difference between drowning and dominion. "Every bone tells a story," Dr. Voss said, laying out a series of fossils on her work table. A Basilosaurus vertebra, heavy and thick, sat beside the delicate ribs of an earlier ancestor. "Look at this. See how the spine elongates, how the hips detach. This isn't just adaptation, it's surrender." Her assistant, Mark, leaned in. "So they just gave up walking?" "No." She tapped the vertebra. "They traded it. For speed, for depth." The sea rewarded their devotion. Doruden, sleek and swift, darted through the Eocene oceans like shadows, their bodies a blueprint for the whales to come. No longer burdened by the need to crawl onto land, they grew larger, their skeletons lightening with air-filled bones to balance the crushing weight of the deep. But the most telling change lay in their ears. "Listen to this," Dr. Voss said, holding up a fossilized earbone. "Land mammals here through air. Whales." She grinned. They built a new way. The bone, dense and bulbous, was designed to catch vibrations in water, sound traveling 4 times faster than in air. A world once silent to their ancestors now sang to them in clicks and echoes, the first whispers of echolocation. Mark whistled. So they could hear the ocean. They could own it. And own it they did. The Basilosaurids, monsters like Basilosaurus itself, were the culmination. No longer half-hearted swimmers, but true leviathans. Their serpentine bodies, though still bearing the ghost of hind limbs, tiny, dangling, useless, were built for the hunt. They were the first to taste the abyss, to dive beyond the sun's reach and return unchallenged. Yet, for all their power, they carried the past in their bones. Dr. Voss ran a finger along a Basilosaurus rib, her voice softening. "Even kings have ghosts. These?" She nodded at the remnants of pelvis, the stubborn fragments of land still clinging to the sea's greatest predator. "These are theirs." Outside, the rain had stopped. Somewhere beyond the lab walls, the ocean breathed, as it always had. The water remembered. And so, it seemed, did the whales. The Eocene seas were a battleground. Warm, shallow waters stretched across the globe, thick with life, schools of fish like silver clouds, squid darting like ink-stained ghosts, and the smaller early whales that had begun to claim the oceans as their own. But above them all, silent and serpentine, glided Basilosaurus. It was not the first whale, but it was the first true terror of the deep. 40, perhaps 50 feet long, its body was a whip of muscle, sinuous and relentless. Unlike the sleek giants of today, Basilosaurus moved with the undulating grace of an eel, its spine flexing in great, sweeping curves. Its jaws, lined with teeth like shattered glass, could snap a Doruden, its smaller, dolphin-like cousin, in half with a single bite. Dr. Lyra Voss stood in the dim glow of the museum's fossil hall, her gaze fixed on the reconstructed skeleton looming above her. The Basilosaurus arched over the display, its ribs splayed like the fingers of a drowned god. "Look at those vertebrae," she murmured to Mark, who stood beside her clutching a notebook. "See how they're elongated. This wasn't just a swimmer, it was a striker." Mark swallowed. "Like a snake. Like a harpoon." Basilosaurus hunted with a speed and precision that would have made the oceans shudder. Its long body allowed for sudden, explosive lunges, its tail driving it forward in bursts that left prey with no time to flee. Fossilized stomach contents told the tale, bones of smaller whales, fish, even sharks, all crushed and splintered. It didn't just eat, Dr. Voss said, stepping closer to the fossil. It devoured. The Eocene was an era of experimentation, of life testing new forms, new niches. Basilosaurus was nature's answer to a question no one had asked. What if the ocean had a king? And yet, for all its power, it was an evolutionary dead end. Mark frowned at the skeleton's tiny, dangling hind limbs. Why keep these? They're useless. Dr. Voss smiled faintly. Not useless, a reminder of where it came from. Basilosaurus was the last of its kind, a monster without descendants. The whales that followed would take different paths, sleeker, smarter, gentler. But for a fleeting moment in geologic time, Basilosaurus ruled unchallenged. Then the world changed. The seas cooled. The currents shifted. The abundance that had fed its reign began to fade. And Basilosaurus, for all its strength, could not adapt. Dr. Voss placed a hand on the fossil's rib, as if feeling for a heartbeat. "Every king falls," she said softly, "even this one." Outside, the wind carried the salt tang of the distant ocean. Somewhere, beneath the waves, the descendants of Basilosaurus sang. But the water never forgot its first true monster. The skeleton told the story, but the flesh, what little they could reconstruct, whispered nightmares. Dr. Lyra Voss circled the Basilosaurus display, her boots clicking against the museum floor. The fossil loomed, its vertebrae coiled like a noose, its skull grinning with jagged teeth. "Let's start with the body," she said, gesturing to the sinuous spine. 40 to 50 feet of pure predator. Not built for endurance like modern whales, but for ambush. Mark hovered nearby, his pencil poised over his sketchbook. So it wasn't a long-distance swimmer? Number, look at the proportions. She traced the air where muscle would have been. Shorter flippers, elongated torso. This thing moved like a sea snake. A sudden lunge, a burst of speed, then stillness. It didn't chase. It struck. The tail was the engine. Unlike the horizontal flukes of today's whales, Basilosaurus's tail flukes were vertical, slicing through the water like a shark's. But where sharks relied on rigid cartilage, Basilosaurus had a spine built for whip-crack flexibility. "Imagine it," Dr. Voss murmured. "One flick of that tail, and it could cross half a school of fish. In a heartbeat. No warning, just—" She snapped her fingers. "Gone." Mark shuddered. And the jaws. Dr. Voss stepped closer to the skull. The teeth alone were enough to make the bravest diver flinch. Jagged, serrated, each one a butcher's tool. "Omnidirectional terror," she said. "Most predators have a kill bite. Lions go for the throat, sharks aim for the belly. But Basilosaurus?" She tapped a finger against a fossilized fang. "This thing didn't care where it bit. Every tooth was a hook. Every bite was fatal." Fossilized stomach contents painted a gruesome picture. Bones shattered beyond recognition, fragments of smaller whales, even the armored plates of ancient turtles, all crushed. "It didn't just kill its prey," Dr. Voss said. "It unmade them." Mark's pencil scratched furiously across the page, sketching the beast as it might have been, muscle coiled beneath thick hide, eyes black and depthless. "And the hind limbs?" he asked, glancing at the tiny vestigial bones near the tail. Dr. Voss smirked. "Nature's little joke, useless for walking, useless for swimming, just there. A relic of a past it left behind." She stepped back, arms crossed, studying the skeleton as a whole. "Perfect," she murmured. "Perfectly designed for one thing. horror. Somewhere in the museum's shadows, a child gasped. The skeleton, lit from below, cast a serpentine silhouette against the wall, a ghost of the Eocene, still hungry. Mark swallowed. I'm glad these things are extinct. Dr. Voss didn't answer. Somewhere the ocean breathed, and in the dark something remembered. The teeth were the first clue to Basilosaurus' reign of terror. Dr. Voss adjusted the magnifying lamp over the fossilized jaw, its serrated edges catching the light like broken glass. Most predators have specialized teeth, incisors for gripping, molars for crushing. But Basilosaurus? She ran a gloved finger along the row of fangs. Every one of these is a dagger. No chewing, just rending. Mark leaned in, his breath fogging the glass display. So it just tore chunks off? Worse. She tapped the largest tooth, its edge notched from a lifetime of shattering bone. These weren't just for cutting, they were levers. The biomechanics were brutal. Basilosaurus's jaws could exert over 1,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to snap a sea turtle's shell like kindling. But it wasn't just strength that made them deadly. See the curvature. Dr. Voss traced the backward slant of the teeth. Prey couldn't twist free. Once those jaws closed, the only escape was through. Fossilized stomach contents told the tale. Bones not just broken, but pulverized. Ribs splintered into splinters, vertebrae crushed into gravel. Basilosaurus didn't just eat, it unmade its meals. Mark paled. Did anything hunt it? Dr. Voss shook her head. Nothing big enough. But the teeth were only half the story. She moved to a reconstructed skull, its hollow eye sockets staring blindly. Now the senses. Modern whales relied on echolocation, but Basilosaurus' skull lacked the specialized structures for sonar. Instead, its weapon was vision. Forward-facing eyes, she noted, pointing to the orbital placement. Binocular vision. It could judge distance like a shark, essential for something that struck like a viper. And then there was the lateral line. Dr. Voss gestured to faint grooves along the fossil's snout. Pressure sensors. Even in murky water, it could feel the wake of a struggling Dorudon 100 feet away. Mark's pencil flew across his sketchpad, shading in the beast's hide, not smooth like a dolphin's, but rough, pebbled, lined with sensory pores. So it was basically a torpedo with teeth. With one purpose. Dr. Voss agreed. She stepped back, arms crossed, as the skeleton's shadow loomed across the wall. Evolution doesn't do good enough. This? She nodded at the fossil. This was perfection. For a heartbeat, the museum seemed to hold its breath. The skeleton's grin widened in the flickering light, its teeth whispering of a time when the seas ran red. Then a child's laughter echoed from the next hall, shattering the illusion. Mark exhaled. Thank God it's gone. Dr. Voss didn't answer. Somewhere beyond the walls, the tide turned. The ocean never forgot its monsters. The Eocene seas were a world of shifting murk, where sunlight bled into gloom and shadows moved with a life of their own. Here, Basilosaurus reigned. It did not chase, it did not herd, it ambushed. Dr. Lyra Voss adjusted the holographic simulation in the university's lab, the projection casting eerie blue light across her face. The digital Basilosaurus hung suspended in virtual water, its body coiled like a spring. Watch, she murmured. With a flick of her wrist, the scene erupted into motion. A school of early whales, Dorudon, sleek and swift, darted through the water, their forms glinting like scattered coins. They moved in tight formation, safety in numbers. But safety was an illusion. The Basilosaurus struck without warning. One moment the water was still, the next 40 feet of muscle uncoiled, its tail driving it forward in a burst of speed that sent shockwaves through the simulation. Its jaws gaped wide, teeth gleaming like broken glass. The lead Dorudon never saw it coming. The impact was brutal. The Basilosaurus's teeth punched through flesh and bone with the ease of a blade through paper. Blood billowed in dark clouds as the predator whipped its head sideways, tearing its prey in half with a single, savage motion. Mark flinched. Jesus. Dr. Voss didn't blink. Efficient, she said, freezing the simulation. No wasted movement, no prolonged struggle, one bite, one kill. The holographic Basilosaurus hovered over its mangled prey, its body already coiling for the next strike. It wasn't just hunting, she continued. It was terrorizing. Fossil evidence suggested Basilosaurus favored murky waters, estuaries, shallow seas, anywhere the light struggled to penetrate. Perfect for an ambush predator. Its dark, pebbled hide would have blended into the gloom, its lateral line sensors tracking the vibrations of unsuspecting prey. And then, the strike. Like a crocodile, Mark muttered, sketching frantically. But faster. Faster, Dr. Voss agreed, and smarter. She reset the simulation, this time populating the water with schools of giant Eocene fish. Encodus, their dagger-like teeth no match for the true terror of the deep. The Basilosaurus moved among them like a shadow, its body undulating with eerie precision. It didn't just attack, it herded. With sudden lunges, it drove the fish into tighter clusters, their panicked movements creating a whirlpool of silver scales. Then, with a final devastating sweep of its tail, it plowed through the center, jaws snapping, swallowing half the school in a single, grotesque gulp. Mark's pencil stilled. It played with them. Dr. Voss's lips curled. It controlled them. The simulation faded, leaving the lab in silence. Outside, the first drops of rain tapped against the windows, a quiet counterpoint to the violence they'd just witnessed. Dr. Voss crossed her arms, staring at the now empty hologram. This wasn't just predation, she said softly. This was dominance. The Basilosaurus hadn't just lived in the Eocene seas. It had ruled them. And for a fleeting moment, as the rain whispered against the glass, Mark could almost hear it, the ghost of a scream, echoing up from the depths of time. The ocean's first true monster. Still hungry, still waiting. The Eocene Sea was a fever dream of life, a roiling, sun-drenched world where every shadow hid teeth. Warmth clung to the water like sweat, thick with the scent of salt and decay. Sunlight speared through the shallows, painting shifting mosaics on the seabed. But beyond the light's reach, the water darkened into a blue so deep it verged on black. Here, in the Goldilocks zone between surface and abyss, Basilosaurus ruled. Dr. Lyra Voss adjusted the microscope, her fingers brushing the fossilized remains of an Eocene reef. "Look at this," she murmured, nudging the slide toward Mark. "Coral polyps, mollusk shells, even the imprints of seaweed. This wasn't just water. It was a jungle. And like any jungle, it teemed with predators. Sharks cruised the depths. Carcharoccals auriculatus, ancestors of the mighty megalodon, their serrated teeth built for shearing flesh. Giant bony fish, some the size of cars, schooled in shimmering battalions, their scales flashing like armor. And then there were the smaller whales, Dorudon, sleek and quick, their laughterless clicks echoing through the water as they hunted squid and fish. but none of them were safe. Mark leaned over the reconstruction on Dr. Voss's desk, a diorama of the Eocene ocean, complete with miniature Basilosaurus, coiled like a living torpedo. So it ate everything? Everything it could catch. She tapped the model's jagged teeth. Sharks, fish, other whales, even turtles. A fossilized carapace sat nearby, cracked like an eggshell. Nothing was off the menu. The ecosystem bent around Basilosaurus. Fossilized coprolites, ancient feces, revealed bones from a dozen species, all ground into splinters. Its presence alone would have reshaped migration patterns, driven prey into shallower waters, forced competitors into narrower niches. Dr. Voss traced a finger along the diorama's edge. This wasn't just a predator. It was an event. A shadow passing over the sun. A storm with teeth. Outside, thunder rumbled, the sound vibrating through the lab's old pipes. The lights flickered, casting the Basilosaurus model into stark relief, its shadow stretching across the wall like a spectre. Mark shivered. How did anything survive it? Some didn't. Dr. Voss picked up a Doruden vertebra, its edges gnawed smooth. But life finds a way. The smaller whales grew faster, more agile, their bodies streamlining under the constant threat. Fish evolved tighter schools, better camouflage. Sharks learned to avoid the whip-crack silhouette of the king. Pressure, she said softly. It forced evolution's hand. For 10 million years, Basilosaurus was the apex. The seas bent to its hunger, the food chain trembling beneath its reign. And then, the world changed. The diorama's water, painted a lush, tropical blue, darkened at the edges where Dr. Voss had brushed her thumb. A warning. The Eocene didn't last, she said. The oceans cooled. Currents shifted. The reefs died. The Basilosaurus, for all its might, was a creature of warmth and abundance. When the feast ended, so too did the feaster. Mark exhaled. So it just vanished? Dr. Voss nodded. Every king's reign ends. But the ocean remembered. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the windows like distant footsteps. Somewhere beyond the glass, the descendants of Basilosaurus sang in the deep. Gentler giants, their teeth gone, their bodies reshaped by time. Yet in the dark, in the quiet, the water still whispered of monsters. The Eocene seas knew no master but Basilosaurus. No rival matched its size. No predator dared challenge its reign. Even the sharks, ancient, relentless, gave its serpentine shadow a wide berth. The ocean was its kingdom, and every living thing within it was either prey or irrelevance. Dr. Lyra Voss stood before the fossilized skull in the museum's vault, her fingers hovering just above the jagged teeth. This, she said, her voice low, was the end of the line. Mark frowned. What do you mean? I mean nothing ate it. She tapped the fang with her pen. No bite marks on the bones, no evidence of scavenging. When this thing died, it wasn't torn apart. It just stopped. The skull grinned up at them, its hollow sockets staring into some unseen distance. Basilosaurus didn't just dominate the food chain, it crowned it. Fossil records showed no predators large or bold enough to take it on. Even in death, its skeleton lay undisturbed, as if the sea itself refused to claim its king. Mark flipped through his notes. So it was invincible? Not invincible. Dr. Voss corrected. Uncontested. She pulled up a holographic reconstruction, a map of the Eocene oceans, dotted with the silhouettes of its inhabitants. Doruden flitted like minnows. Sharks circled warily. And there, Coiled through the center like a serpent through grass, Basilosaurus moved unchallenged. "Look at the size distribution," she said, zooming in. "Everything else is half its length or smaller. Nothing could threaten it. Nothing even tried." The hologram flickered as she overlaid stomach content data, crushed bone fragments, fish scales, even the occasional shark tooth. Basilosaurus didn't discriminate. It ate what it wanted, when it wanted, and the ecosystem bent to accommodate its hunger. Mark swallowed. It was like a natural disaster. Exactly. Dr. Voss shut off the projection, leaving them in the dim vault light. Apex predators shape their worlds. Wolves cull deer herds, keeping forests from overgrazing. Great whites control seal populations. But Basilosaurus? She nodded to the skull. This didn't just shape its world. It defined it. For 10 million years, the Eocene seas existed in its shadow. Prey species evolved faster reflexes, tighter schools, darker camouflage, anything to avoid the snap of those jaws. Competitors vanished into narrower niches, leaving the open waters to the true Leviathan. And then, inevitably, the world changed. The hologram flickered back on, this time showing the cooling oceans of the late Eocene. Reefs bleaching, currents shifting, the warm shallows that had been Basilosaurus's hunting grounds shrinking like a noose. It wasn't dethroned. Dr. Voss murmured. Its kingdom starved. No predator killed Basilosaurus, no rival usurped its throne. The seas simply grew colder, leaner, less forgiving to a creature built for gluttony. Mark exhaled. So it wasn't beaten. It was left behind. Dr. Voss nodded. Every apex falls, but this one? She ran a hand along the fossil's brow, her fingers tracing the grooves where muscle once anchored. This one was never meant to fall. The vault door creaked open, spilling hallway light across the skull's teeth. For a heartbeat, they gleamed like knives. Then the door shut, and the dark swallowed them whole. Somewhere, deep in the ocean's memory, the water still trembled at its passing. The desert breathed dust. Alabama, 1834. The air shimmered with heat, the cracked earth stretching endlessly under a merciless sun. Richard Harlan wiped his brow with a dirt-streaked sleeve, squinting at the bone protruding from the sandstone like a ship's broken rib. "Another one," he muttered, crouching to brush away the grit. The fragment was massive, too large for any creature he knew. His pulse quickened. Harlan was a man of medicine, not fossils, but the peculiarities of the earth had always called to him. This skeleton, unearthed by a farmer's plough, was unlike anything in his books. The vertebrae alone were the size of dinner plates, ridged and heavy, the hollows where muscle once anchored deep enough to fit his fist. "Doctor?" The farmer, a wiry man named Cooper, hovered behind him, hat clutched in nervous hands. "Ain't never seen bones like that. They devil's work?" Harlan didn't answer. His fingers traced the curve of the bone, the smoothness of it, worn by time but unmistakably aquatic. "No," he said at last. "This is something older. Something hungrier." Weeks later, the bones lay arranged across the floor of Harlan's study, a grotesque puzzle. The spine stretched nearly 40 feet, the ribs arcing like the vault of some ancient cathedral. The skull, when he'd finally pried it free, had nearly stopped his heart. Elongated, serpentine, the jaw lined with teeth like shards of broken glass. Harlan sat back in his chair, ink staining his fingers. The name came to him in a rush of Latin certainty. Basilosaurus, King Lizard. A fitting title for a monster. He penned his findings with feverish haste, the lamplight flickering over the page. The creature's size suggests a marine origin, he wrote, though its anatomy bears the hallmarks of a reptile. A sea serpent, perhaps, of biblical proportions. A knock at the door startled him. His colleague, Dr. Joseph Leedy, stood in the doorway, his sharp eyes scanning the bones. "Richard," he said slowly, "you've made a mistake." Harlan bristled. "The classification is sound. The vertebrae are not a lizard's." Lady crouched, running a hand along the fossil's hip. "See this? The pelvic remnants, the shape of the molars." He looked up, a smile tugging at his lips. "This isn't a reptile, Richard. It's a whale." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Harlan's stomach dropped. A whale? Impossible. Whales were blubbered giants, slow and docile. This was a weapon. Leidy stood, dusting his hands. An ancestor, of course, one that never lost its teeth. He glanced at the skull's jagged grin. Or its appetite. Harlan stared at the bones, the truth settling over him like a shroud. He'd named a king, but the ocean, it seemed, had crowned a monster. Outside, the wind howled through the streets, carrying the scent of salt from some distant shore. The past was stirring. The scientific community erupted like a storm-tossed sea. Harlan's Basilosaurus, now known to be a whale, not a lizard, became the center of a debate that raged through lecture halls and laboratories. Some scholars clung to the reptilian classification, unwilling to accept that the gentle giants of their era had such monstrous kin. Others, like Leidy, saw the truth in the bones, the vestigial hips, the ear structures, the undeniable lineage written in stone. Dr. Lyra Voss stood before a glass case in the university archives, her reflection ghosting over the fossilized Basilosaurus tooth displayed within. "This," she said, tapping the glass, "is where modern whale research began, not with a whisper, but with a roar." Mark flipped through a facsimile of Harlan's original notes. The ink faded, but the fervor still palpable. He really didn't want to be wrong, did he? "Pride's a powerful thing," Voss murmured, "but the bones don't lie." The breakthrough came when more fossils emerged. Dorudan skeletons, smaller but strikingly similar in structure, their whale ancestry undeniable. Then the Pachycetus finds in Pakistan, the walking whales of Egypt, the ambulocytus that bridged the gap between land and sea. The puzzle pieces locked together, revealing a story far grander than Harlan could have imagined. Voss led Mark to a reconstruction of Basilosaurus's inner ear, the dense, bulbous structure unmistakably cetacean. "This was the clincher," she said. "Land mammals here one way, whales another, and this?" She grinned. "This was a whale's ear in a killer's skull." Mark leaned in. So Harlan's sea serpent was just a really pissed-off grandpa to modern whales. "Grandpa?" Voss laughed. "More like the conqueror they never talk about at family reunions." The debate shifted. No longer about what Basilosaurus was, but how it fit into the tapestry of evolution. Its serpentine body, once seen as reptilian, was now understood as a specialized adaptation, a fleeting experiment in whale design. The tiny hind limbs, once dismissed as curiosities, became critical evidence of the journey from land to sea. Voss paused at a display of Basilosaurus vertebrae, each one a testament to its reign. "Science isn't just about answers," she said softly. "It's about learning to ask the right questions." Harlan had asked, "Is this a lizard?" Leidy had asked, "Could it be a whale?" Now, Voss asked, what did it mean to be one? The answers rewrote history. Mark exhaled, staring at the fossils. So Basilosaurus wasn't a mistake. It was a milestone. Voss nodded. The most important predator you've never heard of. Outside, the wind rattled the archive's old windows, a sound like distant waves. Somewhere beneath the earth, more bones waited, more secrets, more stories. The past wasn't done speaking. And the ocean, as always, remembered its monsters. The desert gave up its dead reluctantly. Wadi al-Hitan, Whale Valley, stretched beneath the Egyptian sun like a scar, its golden sands hiding the bones of ancient leviathans. Dr. Lyra Voss adjusted her sunglasses, the heat already pressing against her skin like a living thing. Around her, the excavation team moved with practiced efficiency, brushes whispering over sandstone, cameras snapping to document each fragment. "Over here!" called Yusuf, their lead field assistant, crouched beside a partially exposed vertebra the size of a dinner plate. Voss knelt beside him, her fingers hovering just above the fossil. The bone was honey-colored, its surface etched with time, but still sharp in its contours. "Basilosaurus?" she murmured. "Look at the articulation. This spine was built to flex." Mark joined them, his notebook already open. "How many does that make this season?" 16. She grinned. "And we're just getting started." Wadi al-Hitan was a graveyard of giants. 40 million years ago, this barren expanse had been a shallow sea teeming with life and death. Now the skeletons of Basilosaurus and its smaller cousin Dorudon lay half buried in the rock, their bones telling stories of a time when whales were still learning to be whales. Yusuf carefully brushed sand from a rib. "This one's intact. No bite marks, no scavenging damage. Just died." Voss nodded. "Natural causes, maybe. Or stranding." She traced the curve of the rib, imagining the flesh that had once sheathed it, thick muscle, blubber, skin dark as storm clouds. They were kings, but even kings fall. The team worked in silence, the only sounds the scrape of tools and the occasional cry of a desert bird overhead. Then a shout from the far side of the dig site shattered the calm. "Dr. Voss, you need to see this!" She was on her feet in an instant, Mark and Yusuf close behind. The speaker, a young grad student named Amina, stood beside a freshly uncovered skull, but not Basilosaurus. This skull was smaller, sleeker, its jaws lined with needle-like teeth. "Dorudon," Voss breathed. "Juvenile by the size." She crouched, her pulse quickening as she spotted the fractures along the parietal bone. "And look here, these aren't weathering cracks." Mark leaned in. "They're puncture marks. Bite marks." Voss's fingers hovered over the damage, her mind reconstructing the scene. A young Dorudon separated from its pod. The shadow of Basilosaurus uncoiling from the depths. The snap of jaws, the crush of bone. She sat back on her heels. "We've got proof." "Proof of what?" Mark asked. "That Basilosaurus didn't just share these waters with Dorudon." She tapped the skull. "It ate them." The implications hung in the air like heat haze. Cannibalism wasn't uncommon in nature, but this was predation on a scale that reshaped their understanding of the Eocene food chain. Yusuf whistled. "So much for peaceful coexistence." Voss stood, brushing sand from her knees. There was no peace, only power. As the team documented the find, the desert wind picked up, hissing through the canyon walls like a voice from the past. Voss stared at the skull, its empty sockets staring back. Basilosaurus hadn't just ruled these seas, it had terrorized them. And now, grain by grain, the desert was giving up its secrets. Mark snapped a photo, the camera flash stark against the fading light. "What now?" Voss smiled. Now we keep digging. Somewhere beneath their feet, the ocean's first monster waited. The Dorodon skull lay on the examination table, its fractures illuminated by the harsh light of Dr. Voss's lamp. The puncture marks were unmistakable, jagged, deep, spaced perfectly to match the fangs of Basilosaurus. Mark leaned in, his breath fogging the glass of his protective goggles. So it just crushed it? Not crushed. Voss rotated the skull, her gloved finger tracing the grooves. See how the fractures radiate outward? This wasn't a single massive bite. It was precision. She pulled up a 3D scan on the monitor, overlaying the Dorodon skull with a digital reconstruction of Basilosaurus's jaws. The alignment was chilling. Every puncture matched a tooth, each fracture a testament to the force behind the bite. First it gripped, Voss explained, pointing to the deepest marks near the skull's base. Here, where the spinal cord connects, a killing bite. Then her finger slid to the lateral fractures. It shook. The image was gruesomely clear. Basilosaurus hadn't just killed its prey, it had disassembled it, tearing flesh from bone with whip-crack thrashing. Fossilized stomach contents from other specimens confirmed the aftermath. Dorodon ribs splintered as if passed through a grinder, vertebrae gnawed to splinters. Mark swallowed. Why not just swallow it whole? Too big. Voss zoomed in on the Dorodon's size relative to Basilosaurus's gullet. Even a juvenile would have been a mouthful, so it processed its meals, breaking them into manageable chunks. She tapped the screen, pulling up another scan. A fossilized Enceladus, a giant predatory fish, its skull similarly punctured. Same pattern, same technique. Basilosaurus didn't just have a preferred prey, it had a signature. The teeth were the key. Unlike modern orcas, which often hunt cooperatively, Basilosaurus was a solitary killer. Its serrated fangs acted like meat hooks, preventing escape, while its powerful neck muscles did the rest. Voss picked up a magnifying glass, examining a particularly deep groove. And look here, microfractures along the tooth marks. This wasn't a clean bite. It struggled. The evidence painted a brutal scene. The Dorodon thrashing, Basilosaurus holding on, the water churning with blood and panic. A hunt as efficient as it was merciless. Mark's pencil hovered over his sketchpad. So it wasn't just strong, it was methodical. Calculating. Voss corrected. She pulled up a map of Wadi al-Hitan's fossil distribution, the Basilosaurus and Dorodon remains clustered like predator and prey in a snapshot. It didn't waste energy chasing, it ambushed. The teeth told the full story. Wear patterns indicated a diet heavy with bone, no gentle suction feeding like modern baleen whales. This was a creature built for violence, its jaws engineered to inflict maximum damage. Voss leaned back, arms crossed. Modern whales sing. Basilosaurus. It screamed. The lab fell silent. Outside, the wind howled, a sound almost like the ocean. Mark stared at the skull. I'm glad I wasn't around to hear it. Voss didn't answer. Somewhere, in the dark of the deep past, the teeth were still hungry. The Eocene seas were a fevered dream, warm, shallow, thick with life, and ripe for slaughter. Sunlight bled through the water in golden shafts, illuminating schools of fish that moved like liquid silver. Coral reefs sprawled across the seabed, their branches home to crustaceans and mollusks, their crevices hiding the quick, skittering forms of early squid. The water itself was heavy with salt and warmth, a bath of nutrients that fed an explosion of life. And in the midst of it all, Basilosaurus ruled. Dr. Lyra Voss adjusted the climate simulation in the university's lab, the holographic ocean shimmering with data. Look at these temperatures. she murmured, pointing to the swirling currents. Surface waters averaging 30 degrees Celsius. No polar ice caps. The entire planet was a greenhouse. Mark leaned in, his shadow falling across the projection. So it was like a global aquarium. An aquarium with teeth. She zoomed in on the shallow continental shelves, the hunting grounds. Warm water holds less oxygen. That means slower metabolisms for most creatures. But Basilosaurus? She tapped a key, and the hologram shifted to show the predator's reconstructed musculature. This thing was built for bursts of speed. It didn't need endurance. It needed ambush. The Eocene's warmth had shaped Basilosaurus in ways no other whale would replicate. Its serpentine body allowed it to lurk in the oxygen-poor shallows, where prey grew sluggish, then strike with terrifying speed. The heat that slowed its victims only fueled its own ferocity. Mark frowned. But wouldn't it overheat? Not with this. Voss pulled up a cross-section of Basilosaurus's hypothesized circulatory system, a network of blood vessels designed to regulate temperature, much like modern sharks. It could shunt blood to its core during a chase, keep its muscles burning when everything else was gasping. The simulation flickered, reconstructing a hunt. A Dorudon, its movements languid in the warm water, drifted near a reef. Then, Basilosaurus uncoiled. The hologram blurred as the predator crossed the distance in seconds, its jaws snapping shut with a force that sent shockwaves through the water. The Dorudon had no time to react. Blood billowed in dark clouds. Efficiency, Voss said, freezing the simulation. No wasted energy, no prolonged chase, just impact. But the climate that birthed Basilosaurus also doomed it. She switched the display to the late Eocene, the waters cooling as ocean currents shifted. Reefs died. Fish migrated. The lush shallows that had been Basilosaurus's killing grounds shrank, leaving it a king without a kingdom. Mark exhaled. So when the world cooled, it couldn't adapt. Voss shut off the hologram, leaving the lab in sudden dimness. Its body was too specialized, its prey too scattered. The Eocene giveth, and the Eocene taketh away. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like fingers drumming on glass. Voss crossed her arms, staring at the blank screen. We think of evolution as progress, but sometimes... She nodded at the fossilized Basilosaurus tooth on her desk, its serrated edge catching the light. It's just a dead end with really good teeth. The ocean had moved on. The whales that followed would embrace colder waters, deeper dives, gentler diets. But for a moment, a glorious, bloody moment, the seas had belonged to a monster. And the water would never forget. The Eocene seas were not kind to the weak. Basilosaurus ruled, but it did not reign unchallenged. Other predators lurked in the warm, murky waters. Sharks with teeth like serrated knives, giant bony fish that could swallow a man whole, and the ever-present threat of its own kin turning on one another. Yet none could match the serpentine fury of the ocean's true king. Dr. Lyra Voss spread a series of fossilized teeth across the lab table, each one a relic of a different predator. The Eocene was an arms race, she said, tapping the longest fang, a Carcharochles auriculatus tooth, curved like a sickle. And this was the competition. Mark picked up the shark tooth, its edge still sharp after millions of years. So Basilosaurus fought these things. Fought. Voss smirked. It outclassed them. The holographic display flickered to life, reconstructing the Eocene's apex predators. Carcharochles sharks, ancestors of the megalodon, cruised the depths, their jaws capable of shearing through flesh and bone. Giant Enceladus, saber-toothed herrings, schooled in the shallows, their dagger-like teeth glinting. And then there were the smaller, opportunistic hunters, crocodilians, raptorial fish, even other early whales like Dorudon. But none had the sheer brutality of Basilosaurus. Voss zoomed in on the holographic shark. Fast, yes. Strong, absolutely. But look at the body plan. The shark moved with rigid efficiency, its tail driving it forward in steady, powerful strokes. Built for endurance, not ambush. Basilosaurus? The simulation shifted. The Basilosaurus uncoiled like a whip, its spine flexing in a sudden, explosive lunge. The shark barely had time to twist away before those jagged teeth sank into its flank, tearing a chunk of flesh free in a cloud of blood. Mark flinched. It just outmaneuvered it. Outdesigned it, Voss corrected. She pulled up a biomechanical overlay, the shark's cartilage skeleton versus Basilosaurus's reinforced vertebrae. Sharks are built for stability. Basilosaurus was built for acceleration, 0 to lethal in seconds. And then there was the intelligence factor. Fossilized bite marks on Carcharocal's bones told a grim story. Basilosaurus didn't just kill its rivals, it targeted them. Voss tapped a particular specimen, a shark vertebra with puncture wounds matching Basilosaurus's fangs. This wasn't predation. This was dominance. The message was clear. These waters are mine. Mark frowned. But why bother? If it could eat fish and smaller whales, why risk fighting sharks? Because apex predators don't just compete for food. Voss's eyes gleamed. They compete for fear. A shark that feared Basilosaurus would avoid its hunting grounds. A Dorudon that had seen its kin torn apart would flee at the first flicker of its shadow. The ocean's hierarchy wasn't just about sustenance, it was about control, and Basilosaurus controlled through terror. The hologram dissolved into a map of fossil sites, the remains of Basilosaurus and its rivals scattered like battlefields. In every region, the evidence was the same. Shattered shark teeth, Dorudon skulls with bite marks, even the occasional Basilosaurus rib scored with the grooves of a desperate counterattack. But never a fatal wound. Voss crossed her arms. It didn't just win, it defined the rules. Mark exhaled, staring at the teeth on the table. So it wasn't just the biggest. It was the smartest. The most ruthless. Voss agreed. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the lab windows. Somewhere beyond the glass, the ocean breathed. A quieter world now, one where great whites ruled and whales sang. But for a moment, in the dark of the deep past, the water had trembled at the passing of a true king. And its rivals had learned the hardest lesson of all. Some monsters cannot be outrun, only outlived. The Eocene ocean was a world of whispers and screams. Sunlight barely pierced the warm, murky waters where Basilosaurus lurked. A realm of shifting shadows and sudden violence. Modern whales sing to communicate, their melodies weaving through the deep like sonar lullabies. But Basilosaurus? If it made sound at all, it would have been a weapon. Dr. Lyra Voss adjusted the hydrophone array in the lab's testing tank, the water rippling around the scaled-down Basilosaurus skull model. We know modern toothed whales use echolocation, she said, tapping the dense bone near the inner ear. But this structure? It's not built for subtlety. Mark leaned against the tank's edge, watching as the sonar emitter pulsed. The returning echoes painted a jagged waveform on the monitor. Sharp, chaotic, nothing like the clean clicks of a dolphin. So it couldn't see with sound? Not like today's whales. Voss zoomed in on the fossilized ear bones, their thick, bulbous shape stark against the delicate cochlear structures of modern cetaceans. but that doesn't mean it was deaf. She switched the display to a simulation, a murky Eocene seascape where a holographic Basilosaurus hung motionless, its body coiled. Then a school of fish darted into frame. The predator's head twitched. Lateral line, Voss murmured. The simulation highlighted a network of sensory pores along the creature's snout, throbbing red as they detected water displacement. It could feel movement, a ripple, a struggle, even a heartbeat's worth of vibration. Mark's eyes widened. Like a shark. Worse. The hologram surged forward, jaws gaping, and the tank's speakers emitted a low-frequency thrum, a sound like a landslide heard through water. The fish scattered too late. Sharks hunt by scent and electromagnetism. Basilosaurus, it orchestrated panic. Voss pulled up a fossilized Dorudon skull, its inner ear bones fractured. This damage isn't from biting, it's from pressure. The theory took shape. Basilosaurus might not have echolocated like modern whales, but its sheer size and speed could have generated shockwaves, a brutal form of biosonar. A tail flick powerful enough to stun prey. A lunge that sent pressure waves pulsing ahead like a seismic warning. Mark whistled. So it didn't just hunt, it herded with terror. Exactly. Voss replayed the simulation, this time with sound waves visible, pulsing rings of force radiating from the predator's movements, corralling fish into tighter schools. Imagine the noise. 40 feet of muscle moving like a whip, water screaming around it, prey disoriented, deafened. The hologram struck. Blood clouded the water. Then silence. The lab lights flickered, casting the tank's shadow across the wall, a serpentine shape, jaws frozen mid-snap. Voss shut off the simulation. Modern whales sing to find each other. Basilosaurus? She tapped the fossil's brow. It didn't need to find anything. The ocean told it where to strike. Outside, thunder rumbled. The first drops of rain tapped against the windows like distant echoes. Mark stared at the skull. No wonder nothing challenged it. Voss nodded. Some predators ruled with strength, others with stealth. Basilosaurus had weaponized the sea itself. And in the dark, where the water still remembered, something listened. Dawn in the Eocene was a slow bleed of gold through warm, shallow waters. The Basilosaurus stirred. 40 feet of muscle uncoiled from the seabed, silt swirling in its wake. Its body, more serpent than whale, flexed with predatory grace as it rose through the water column, its shadow stretching like a promise across the reef below. Morning was for hunting. The sea teemed with life. Schools of Enceladus flickered like silver coins, their dagger teeth glinting. A pod of Dorudon skimmed the surface, their clicks muffled by the weight of water. The Basilosaurus ignored them for now. It had tasted their flesh before, but today it wanted something slower. Something careless. Its lateral line tingled, a vibration, faint but growing. A sea turtle, its shell broad as a shield, paddled lazily through the kelp. The Basilosaurus sank lower, its belly brushing the sand. Waiting. Then strike! Its tail snapped like a whip, propelling it forward in a burst of speed that sent shock waves through the water. The turtle had no time to react. Jaws lined with shattered glass teeth clamped down, crushing shell and bone with a sound like splitting rock. Blood billowed in dark clouds. The Basilosaurus shook its head once, twice, the turtle's limbs tearing free. It swallowed the chunks whole, the taste of iron sharp on its tongue. Noon brought heat, the sun baking the ocean's surface into a shimmering mirror. The Basilosaurus drifted now, its belly full, its movements languid. Around it, the reef pulsed with life, anemones waving their stinging fingers, crabs scuttling through coral castles. A shark, sleek and silver, circled at a distance, scenting blood, but knowing better than to approach. The Basilosaurus exhaled through its blowhole, the bubbles rising like a warning. This was its domain. By dusk, hunger returned. The Dorudon pod had lingered near the reef, their clicks sharper now, edged with unease. The Basilosaurus watched from below, its dark hide blending with the deepening shadows. One calf strayed too far from the group. The attack was instantaneous. The Basilosaurus surged upward, its jaws gaping. The Dorudon twisted, too slow. Teeth sank into its flank, ripping flesh from bone. The water erupted into chaos as the pod scattered, their clicks becoming screams. The Basilosaurus held on, shaking its prey like a terrier with a rat. The Dorudon's spine snapped with a sound that echoed through the water. Then silence. Blood drifted like smoke. The Basilosaurus fed, its meal a testament to its reign. Night fell, black and endless. The Basilosaurus descended, its body weaving through the dark like a living current. Here, in the quiet of the deep, it rested, its muscles loosening, its breath slow. The ocean breathed around it. Somewhere above, the moon painted the waves silver. Somewhere below, the bones of its ancestors whispered. And for now, in the heart of the Eocene, the king slept. But the water remembered, and the hunt would begin again at dawn. The Eocene's golden age was ending. The seas, once warm and thick with life, grew restless. Currents twisted into unfamiliar patterns, their warmth leaching away into the deepening abyss. Reefs that had thrived for millennia began to bleach, their vibrant colors fading to bone-white husks. The fish grew scarce, their schools thinning like smoke on the wind. And Basilosaurus, the king of this vanishing world, felt the hunger first. Dr. Lyra Voss stood before the climate simulation in her lab, the holographic ocean flickering with ominous red tendrils, cooling currents creeping into the shallows. "See here," she murmured, tracing the shifting thermal layers. The temperature dropped nearly 5 degrees in under 1 million years, a heartbeat, geologically speaking. Mark frowned at the data overlay. "That's enough to collapse an ecosystem?" "Enough to reshape it." She zoomed in on the continental shelves, the hunting grounds. Warm water species migrated or died. New predators moved in, and Basilosaurus ... Her finger hovered over the serpentine silhouette in the simulation. It was built for a world that no longer existed. The fossil record told the story in broken bones. Basilosaurus specimens from the late Eocene showed signs of starvation, thin, brittle ribs, healed fractures from desperate attacks on armored prey. Their teeth, once pristine daggers, were worn down from crunching turtle shells and bone, a last resort when fish and smaller whales grew scarce. Voss pulled up a fossilized Basilosaurus vertebra, its edges pitted with lesions. "Stress marks," she said. "This one was starving. Probably swam hundreds of miles searching for food before it died." Mark exhaled sharply. So it wasn't outcompeted, it was left behind. Evolution's cruelest joke. Voss shut off the simulation, the lab plunging into dimness. For 10 million years, Basilosaurus was perfection. Then the rules changed. The cooling oceans favored new hunters, swift, adaptable, built for endurance over ambush. Sharks with tighter turning radii. Early cetaceans that could dive deeper, travel farther. Basilosaurus, for all its power, was a relic of a warmer, richer world. A world that was slipping away. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, the storm mirroring the tumult of the ancient seas. Voss crossed to the fossil display, her fingers brushing the jagged teeth of the king. It didn't go quietly, she said softly. The last Basilosaurus fossils bore the marks of a predator pushed to its limits, broken teeth from futile attacks on armored prey, vertebrae fused from chronic stress, even the occasional bite mark from its own kind. Cannibalism, when the seas turned barren. Mark stared at the teeth, their serrated edges still sharp enough to draw blood. It fought to the end. Voss nodded. Every king does. The ocean had moved on. The whales that followed would embrace colder waters, smarter strategies, gentler diets. But in the silt and stone, the water remembered its first true monster. Not with a whimper, but with a scream. And somewhere, in the dark beneath the waves, the echoes of its reign still lingered. Waiting, hungry, unforgotten. The last Basilosaurus died alone. No fanfare marked its passing. No rival moved in to claim its throne. The sea, once warm and teeming with prey, had grown cold and silent. The great predator's ribs stood out like the beams of a sunken ship, its once powerful muscles wasted to sinew. Even its teeth, those terrible hooks of bone, had dulled from gnawing at the last scraps of a dying world. It drifted now in the twilight zone, where the light barely reached. Its lateral line, once so sensitive to the slightest ripple, registered nothing. No fish schools, no Dorudan clicks, just the endless, crushing pressure of the deep. Then, movement. A flicker in the dark. The Basilosaurus twitched, its instincts flaring even in starvation. It turned its massive head, its vision blurry but still sharp enough to spot the silhouette. Another of its kind. Smaller, younger, just as desperate. They circled each other in the gloom, two shadows in a graveyard. The younger one's ribs showed through its skin, its jaw hanging slightly open. A silent threat, or perhaps a plea. The last Basilosaurus did not hesitate. It struck with the last of its strength, its jaws clamping around the younger one's throat. The water erupted into chaos, blood blooming like ink in the dark. The fight was short. The challenger thrashed, its tail beating uselessly against the larger predator's flanks, but starvation had made them both weak. The last Basilosaurus held on, its teeth sinking deeper. Then stillness. It released the corpse, letting it drift into the abyss. The meal would buy it a few more days, a few more futile patrols of empty waters. But the end was inevitable. When death came, it was quiet. The Basilosaurus sank, its body too heavy now for even the faintest flick of its tail. Down, down, past the last remnants of the reefs it had once hunted. Down to the silt, where the bones of its ancestors already lay. Its massive frame settled into the sediment, the current already beginning to bury it. Sand whispered over its skull, filling its eye sockets, sealing its jaws shut for the last time. The water grew still, and just like that, the king was gone. Millions of years passed. The seas cooled further. Ice caps formed. New creatures rose to dominance. Sleeker whales, smarter sharks, life adapting to the changing world. The descendants of Basilosaurus lost their teeth, traded their fury for song, and became the gentle giants of the modern ocean. But the earth remembered. In Wadi al-Hitan, the wind carved away the stone, revealing the skeletons of the past. In Alabama, a farmer's plow struck something hard, something that hadn't seen the sun in 40 million years. Dr. Lyra Voss knelt in the desert, her brush sweeping sand from a familiar set of vertebrae. The bones were massive, the ridges where muscle once anchored still sharp despite the ages. Mark crouched beside her, his fingers hovering over the fossil. "Is this—" Voss nodded. "The last of its kind." They worked in silence, uncovering the skeleton inch by inch. The skull emerged last, its teeth still bared in a final, defiant snarl. Voss sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow. The desert stretched around them, endless and unforgiving. Once, this had been an ocean. Once, this had been his ocean. She placed a hand on the fossil's brow, as if soothing a restless spirit. "Rest now," she murmured. "Your story isn't over." The wind howled, carrying grains of sand that would, in time, bury the bones once more. But not before they were studied. Not before they were known. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the modern sea breathed, its waves whispering secrets to the shore. And in the dark beneath them, the water still remembered its first true monster. The king, the terror, the Basilosaurus. The bones never lied. Dr. Lyra Voss stood in the museum's archives, surrounded by the skeletal remains of Basilosaurus, vertebrae like stacked dinner plates, ribs curved like sabers, teeth still sharp enough to draw blood after 40 million years. Each fossil was a puzzle piece, a fragment of a story that had rewritten the history of life itself. Mark ran his fingers along the edge of a fossilized flipper, his brow furrowed. "It's crazy to think this thing was once the most feared predator in the ocean." "And now," Voss said, lifting a rib bone to the light, "it's the Rosetta Stone of whale evolution." The discovery of Basilosaurus had shattered old assumptions. Before its fossils were unearthed, the idea that whales had evolved from land-dwelling mammals was met with skepticism. But the vestigial hind limbs, the ear structures, the unmistakable link between the serpentine terror of the Eocene and the gentle giants of today, it was all there, etched in stone. Voss gestured to a display comparing Basilosaurus to modern cetaceans. "See the pelvic bones? Useless for swimming, useless for walking. But they're there, proof of a past spent on land." Mark leaned in. "So it's like an evolutionary receipt?" "Exactly." She moved to a holographic timeline, the branches of the whale family tree sprawling across the wall. Pakicetus, Ambulocetus, Dorudon, they were all stepping stones. But Basilosaurus? She tapped the hologram, its silhouette flaring red. This was the moment whales stopped looking back. The implications rippled far beyond paleontology. Basilosaurus forced scientists to reconsider the fluidity of evolution, how a lineage could pivot from land to water, from predator to plankton sifter, in the geological blink of an eye. Its existence bridged the gap between myth and biology, proving that the most outlandish transformations were not just possible, but inevitable under the right pressures. Voss picked up a replica of Basilosaurus's skull, its teeth gleaming under the fluorescent lights. This wasn't just a predator, it was a transition, a creature caught between worlds, proving that evolution doesn't move in straight lines. She grinned. "It lunges." Mark flipped through a stack of research papers, each one citing Basilosaurus as a keystone in understanding marine adaptation. So, without this thing, we might still be arguing about whale origins? Or worse, missing the point entirely. Voss set the skull down with reverence. "Some fossils fill gaps. This one exploded them." The archives hummed around them, the air thick with the weight of history. Outside, the distant roar of the city seemed trivial compared to the whispers rising from these bones. Voss crossed her arms, staring at the fossils. Every king leaves a legacy. This one. She nodded at the skeleton. It gave us the map to our own past. And in the quiet of the museum, the bones agreed. The water had moved on. The whales had changed. But the story, their story, was far from over. Somewhere, beneath the waves, the echoes of Basilosaurus still swam, not as a ghost, but as a foundation. The name Basilosaurus was a lie wrapped in bone. When Richard Harlan first unearthed those monstrous vertebrae in 1834, he saw not a whale, but a serpent, a leviathan from an age of reptiles. King Lizard, he called it, and the title stuck like grit in the gears of science. Dr. Lyra Voss smirked as she adjusted the projector in the university lecture hall, its glow illuminating a slide of Harlan's original sketches, crude, frantic lines that made Basilosaurus look more dragon than mammal. "The first rule of paleontology," she said, "is that we're usually wrong before we're right." The students chuckled, but Mark, leaning against the back wall, knew the truth beneath the joke. Basilosaurus had become a fossil Rorschach test, its identity shifting with every new discovery. Voss clicked to the next slide, a Victorian-era newspaper cartoon depicting Basilosaurus as a sea monster attacking a steamship, its serpentine body coiled like a noose. "Popular culture loves a good monster," she said, "and what's scarier than a 40-foot dragon lurking in the deep? Never mind that whales were mammals. Never mind that Basilosaurus had died out millions of years before humans existed." The myth took root, watered by sensationalism and the human thirst for terror. Mark raised a hand. "So when did we figure out it was a whale?" Voss brought up an 1845 lithograph of Dr. Joseph Leidy pointing triumphantly at Basilosaurus's vestigial hips. When someone finally listened to the bones, the image morphed into a modern reconstruction, the same creature, but now unmistakably cetacean, its serpentine shape streamlined into a predator's grace. The teeth were mammalian, the ear bones were whale-like. Even the reptilian vertebrae were just really enthusiastic whale anatomy. Yet the myths persisted. Click. A 1950s B-movie poster, Basilosaurus, demon of the deep? The creature depicted was all fangs and glowing eyes, more Godzilla than fossil. Click. A recent clickbait article. Scientists warn ancient sea dragon could return. Voss sighed. People hear King Lizard and stop listening. They want the monster, not the mammal. The irony was thick. Basilosaurus, the whale that wasn't a lizard, the predator that wasn't a dragon, had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of first impressions. Even now, museum displays battled the misconception, their carefully labeled skeletons often overshadowed by visitors' whispered comparisons to mythical serpents. Mark flipped through his notes. So does it matter? I mean, if people think it's cooler than it was, it matters. Voss cut in, because science isn't about cool, it's about true. She advanced to the final slide. A split image. On one side, a fanciful Basilosaurus breathing fire like a storybook beast. On the other, the actual fossil, its bones whispering a subtler, richer story. This creature was terrifying enough without the fairy tales. It didn't need scales to rule the Eocene. It didn't need magic to be a marvel. The projector hummed into silence. Outside, the first stars blinked awake, pale as fossilized teeth in the twilight. Voss packed her notes, her voice softening. We do Basilosaurus a disservice when we make it a monster. It was something better. She snapped the briefcase shut. It was real. And in the darkened hall, the bones in their glass cases seemed to hum with agreement. Not lizards, not dragons, but echoes of a truth more thrilling than any myth. Once the seas had belonged to a king, and its name, however wrong, would never be forgotten. The ocean had moved on. Where Basilosaurus once coiled through warm, murky waters, its descendants now glided, sleek, song-filled, their jaws lined not with daggers but with baleen or the modest pegs of modern toothed whales. The serpentine fury of the Eocene had softened into the gentle giants of today. Dr. Lyra Voss stood before the skeleton of a humpback whale in the museum's main hall, her fingers tracing the placard. Megaptera novae Angliae, a creature that sang, that nurtured its young, that breached the waves with a grace Basilosaurus could never have imagined. Mark circled the display, his brow furrowed. So how do we get from that? He jerked his thumb toward the Basilosaurus exhibit in the adjacent room. To this? Voss smiled. Evolution doesn't erase, it edits. She led him to a comparative anatomy display, Basilosaurus vertebrae beside those of a modern sperm whale. See the elongation? The flexibility? Basilosaurus was built for whip-fast strikes. Modern whales traded that for endurance. She tapped the sperm whale's shorter, sturdier spine. Streamlined, efficient, built for the long dive. The differences were stark, but the echoes remained. Mark crouched to examine the flipper bones. Wait, these look almost the same. Because they are. Voss pulled up a hologram, overlaying the flipper structures of Basilosaurus, Dorudon, and a modern orca. The same five-fingered pattern, the same basic architecture, just reshaped by time. Even the mightiest blue whale carries Basilosaurus in its bones. It's just quieter now. The transition hadn't been immediate. After Basilosaurus vanished, the whales that survived the cooling oceans faced a choice: adapt or die. Some, like the ancestors of dolphins, kept their teeth but traded brute force for speed and intelligence. Others abandoned teeth entirely, developing baleen to filter krill from the icy waters. Voss moved to a diorama of a modern pod of humpbacks, their massive bodies dwarfing the Basilosaurus model beside them. The king is gone, she murmured, but the kingdom thrived. Mark frowned at the baleen plates. So they just stopped being predators. Not stopped, changed. She pulled up an image of a sperm whale's jaw, its conical teeth still formidable. Some kept the old ways, but the real shift? She tapped the humpback's throat grooves, the expandable pleats that allowed it to gulp entire schools of fish. They stopped fighting the water. They harnessed it. The hologram shifted, showing the evolutionary tree, Basilosaurus at its base, its descendants branching into the riot of modern cetaceans. The serpentine terror had spawned the singers, the divers, the gentle giants. Mark exhaled. It's like they traded teeth for songs. Voss nodded. And in doing so, they conquered the globe. Modern whales filled niches Basilosaurus could never have dreamed of. The abyssal dives of sperm whales, the polar migrations of bowheads, the intricate cultures of orcas. Yet the legacy of their ancestor lingered in unexpected ways. She gestured to a fossilized Basilosaurus inner ear beside a modern dolphin's. Same structure, same purpose. One used it to hear prey scream. The other uses it to weave symphonies. The hall fell quiet, the weight of time settling over them. Outside, the distant cry of gulls carried from the shore, a sound that might have been alien to Basilosaurus, but one its descendants knew intimately. Mark stared at the skeletons, the ancient and the modern, the terror and the titan. So Basilosaurus didn't fail. It just paved the way. Voss placed a hand on the humpback's rib, her voice soft. Every king leaves an inheritance. This? She nodded to the Basilosaurus exhibit, its teeth still bared in eternal challenge. This was theirs. The ocean had changed. The monsters had faded. But in the deep, where the water still remembered, the song of the whales carried an echo of the past. a whisper of the first true ruler of the seas. The bones called to them, not with voices, but with the weight of silence. For centuries, Basilosaurus lay buried, its story locked in stone. But there were those who refused to let the past stay buried. Paleontologists, adventurers, and obsessives who devoted their lives to unraveling the enigma of the ocean's first true monster. Dr. Lyra Voss flipped through a weathered field journal in the university archives, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was precise, the sketches meticulous, a record of hunger for truth. Richard Harlan wasn't just a physician, she murmured, tracing the inked lines of a Basilosaurus vertebra. He was the first to see the beast for what it could be. Across the table, Mark leaned in, even though he got it wrong. Especially because he got it wrong. She turned the page to reveal Harlan's frantic margin notes. Reptilian, marine, impossible, scrawled beside measurements. He questioned, "That's the heart of science." Harlan had christened the creature in 1834, his imagination painting a sea serpent where a whale would later be revealed. But his mistake had sparked a debate that would rewrite natural history. Voss closed the journal. He handed us the first piece of the puzzle. It took others to see the full picture. That picture sharpened with Dr. Joseph Leidy. The holographic projector hummed to life, casting a flickering image of the 19th century paleontologist kneeling in an Alabama quarry, his hands cradling a Basilosaurus hip bone. Unlike Harlan, Leidy saw the truth, the subtle mammalian markers, the whisper of ancestry in the vestigial limbs. Leidy didn't just correct Harlan, Voss said. He connected the dots. The hologram shifted, overlaying Basilosaurus bones with those of modern whales. The similarities were undeniable. Leidy's 1845 paper on the fossil remains of a species of cetacean had shattered the sea serpent myth and laid the foundation for evolutionary biology. Mark whistled. So he was the first to say, "Hey, this is a whale." And he paid for it. Voss pulled up a newspaper clipping. Famed scientist claims monstrous lizard is mere mammal. The headline dripping with skepticism. The world wanted dragons. He gave them science. Leidy's persistence paved the way for others. In the early 20th century, expeditions to Egypt's Wadi al-Hitan, Whale Valley, unearthed more Basilosaurus fossils. Their skeletons sprawled across the desert like fallen titans. Paleontologist Eberhard Frass meticulously documented each find, his sketches capturing the creature's serpentine grace. Voss tapped a faded photograph of Frass, standing beside a partially excavated skull, his sunburnt face alight with triumph. He saw the ecosystem, not just the bones, the first to realize Basilosaurus wasn't just a predator, it was the apex. But the desert wasn't the only keeper of secrets. In the 1990s, Dr. Philip Gingerich's team uncovered Basilosaurus fossils in Pakistan, their preservation so exquisite that even the delicate ear bones remained intact. These finds revealed the creature's hearing adaptations, proof of its transition from land to water. Voss held up a cast of one such fossil, the dense, bulbous structure unmistakable. This was the smoking gun. Whale ears don't lie. Gingerich's work cemented Basilosaurus's place in the evolutionary chain, linking it irrevocably to modern cetaceans. But for every answer, new questions arose. Mark flipped through Gingerich's field notes, the pages filled with questions in looping script. Why the elongated body? Why the vestigial limbs? He didn't stop at "it's a whale," did he? Voss smiled. Science never stops. The projector dimmed, the holographic figures of Harlan, Leidy, Frass, and Gingerich dissolving into the dark. Their collective obsession had resurrected Basilosaurus from myth to fact, from monster to milestone. Voss placed a hand on the archive table, her fingers brushing the journals. They all heard the same call, she said softly, the same whisper from the stone. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, a sound like distant waves. The bones never spoke. But the scientists? They listened. The lab hummed with the quiet intensity of discovery. Dr. Lyra Voss adjusted the high-resolution CT scanner, its mechanical arm circling the Basilosaurus vertebra, like a predator sizing up prey. On the monitor, cross-sections of bone materialized in layers, cortical density, vascular channels, microfractures invisible to the naked eye. "Look at this," she murmured, zooming in. The bone's microstructure shimmered with stress lines, fine as spider silk but telling. This wasn't just wear and tear. This was combat. Mark leaned in, his breath fogging the screen. Fights with other Basilosaurus? Or desperate hunts? She rotated the scan, revealing a hairline fracture along the neural spine. Late Eocene specimens show more of these. The seas were changing. Prey was scarcer. They were pushing their bodies to the brink. The scanner whirred, stitching together a 3D model of the vertebra. Voss overlaid it with a modern sperm whale's spinal column. Sturdier, thicker, built for endurance rather than explosive strikes. The differences were stark, but the genetic echoes lingered in the shared architecture of the zygapophyses. Biomechanics meets paleontology, she said, tapping the screen. We can simulate stress points now, calculate bite force down to the Newton, run fluid dynamics on its swimming motion. Mark whistled. So we're not just guessing how it moved. Not since Gingerich's team synced up with robotics labs. She pulled up a video, a mechanical Basilosaurus tail undulating in a test tank, its motion optimized by fossil data. This isn't imagination. It's engineering. The implications rippled beyond academia. By studying Basilosaurus's vertebrae, researchers had refined spinal injury treatments in cetaceans. Its unique ear bone density inspired new sonar shielding for submarines. Even the vestigial hind limbs, long dismissed as evolutionary leftovers, had become a case study in genetic atavisms. Voss swiveled to the spectrometer, where a sliver of enamel glowed under ultraviolet light. And this? Isotope analysis. The readout scrolled. Oxygen-18 levels, strontium ratios. This tooth tells us where it migrated, what it ate, even the water temperature it preferred. Mark squinted at the data. So we're basically forensic paleontologists now? Time detectives, Voss corrected with a grin. She pulled up a global map, dotted with Basilosaurus fossil sites. See this clustering along the Tethys Seaway. Stable isotopes confirm it. They followed the warmth, like modern whales follow krill. The tech had unlocked doors Harlan couldn't have dreamed of. Laser scans preserved fragile fossils in perfect digital replicas. AI algorithms reconstructed fragmented skeletons with eerie accuracy. And in a vault downstairs, a Basilosaurus rib awaited DNA extraction. Not for Jurassic Park fantasies, but to trace the activation of ancient genes still lurking in humpback genomes. Voss powered down the scanner, the lab falling into a reverent hush. Outside, dusk painted the windows gold. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, she said, nodding to the framed portraits of Harlan, Lady, and Gingerich on the wall. But now? She tapped the CT monitor, where the bone's secrets glowed. We're seeing with their eyes and our machines. Mark flipped through the spectrometer's findings. So what's next? Cloning? Voss laughed. Better. Understanding. She gestured to the hologram now flickering above the lab table, a full Basilosaurus reconstruction, its muscles flexing in simulated water. Not just how it lived, but why it mattered. How its rain shaped the oceans. How its fall made room for the whales we know. The hologram dissolved into a modern pod of orcas, their sleek forms a testament to evolution's relentless editing. The past wasn't dead. It was a blueprint. And in the glow of the screens, the bones whispered their final secret. The story isn't over. Somewhere, the ocean still remembered. And the scientists, they were just learning to listen. The water was colder now. Basilosaurus felt it in the sluggishness of its muscles, in the way its breath came harder, the intervals between surfacing growing shorter. The once teeming shallows had emptied, the schools of fish thinning to ghosts, the Dorudan pods migrating to warmer currents. The reefs it had hunted since its first kill were bleached skeletons, their colors faded like old blood. It had been days since its last meal. The hunger was a gnawing void, sharper than teeth. Basilosaurus dove anyway. The descent was slower than it used to be, its body no longer the coiled spring of its prime. Still, it cut through the water with the remnants of its old grace, its lateral line tingling with the faint vibrations of distant life. Something moved in the gloom, a shark, perhaps, or one of the bony fish that had grown bolder in its weakness. It ignored them. Deeper it went, past the ruins of its kingdom, into the dark where the pressure squeezed its ribs like a vice. Here, in the abyss, the water remembered nothing. Not its hunts, not its rain, not the way the seas had once trembled at its passing. A flicker in the dark. Basilosaurus turned, its senses flaring. A shape loomed, another of its kind. Younger, stronger, just as hungry. They circled each other in the silence, two shadows in a graveyard. The challenger's ribs showed through its skin, its jaw hanging slightly open. A threat, a plea, a promise. Basilosaurus did not hesitate. It lunged with the last of its strength, its jaws clamping around the other's throat. The water erupted into chaos, blood blooming like ink. The fight was short. The challenger thrashed, its tail beating uselessly, but starvation had made them both weak. Basilosaurus held on. Then, stillness. It released the corpse, letting it drift into the abyss. The meal would buy it a few more days, a few more dives, but the end was inevitable. When death came, it was quiet. Basilosaurus sank, its body too heavy now for even the faintest flick of its tail. Down, down, past the ruins of the reefs it had once ruled. Down to the silt, where the bones of its ancestors already lay. Its massive frame settled into the sediment, the current already beginning to bury it. Sand whispered over its skull, filling its eye sockets, sealing its jaws shut for the last time. The water grew still, and just like that, the king was gone. Millions of years later, the wind carved the desert open, and the bones breathed again. Dr. Lyra Voss knelt in the dust, her brush sweeping sand from the last vertebra of the last Basilosaurus. The fossil was heavy in her hands, its weight a testament. Mark crouched beside her, his fingers hovering over the bone. So this is it? The end of the line. Voss didn't answer at first. She traced the ridges where muscle had once anchored, the grooves where hunger had carved its mark. No, she said at last, not the end. She looked up, past the desert, toward the unseen sea. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the descendants of Basilosaurus sang, their voices weaving through the deep, carrying the echo of a time when the ocean had known its first true monster. The water had changed, the world had moved on. But here, in the silence of the stone, the king still ruled, and the bones would never forget. The desert wind howled through Wadi al-Hitan, carrying grains of sand that whispered against the fossilized ribs of Basilosaurus. Dr. Lyra Voss stood motionless, her hand resting on the ancient bone as if listening for a pulse. Mark crouched beside her, squinting against the glare of the midday sun. It's strange, isn't it? This thing ruled the oceans and now it's just rock. Voss didn't look up. Not just rock, a lesson. The lesson was written in the vertebrae, each one a testament to evolution's ruthless calculus. Basilosaurus had been the pinnacle of its time, a predator so perfectly adapted to its world that nothing could challenge it. And yet, when the world changed, it had vanished without a trace. Mark brushed sand from a serrated tooth. So what's the takeaway? Adapt or die? Partly. Voss straightened, her gaze sweeping over the skeleton. But it's more than that. Basilosaurus wasn't a failure. It was a blueprint. She stepped back, gesturing to the fossil's sinuous spine. This body ruled the Eocene. When the oceans cooled, its descendants shed the teeth, traded ambush for endurance, and conquered new depths. The king died, but its legacy didn't. The wind shifted, carrying the distant cry of a seabird, a sound Basilosaurus would never have heard. Modern whales sang in the abyss, their songs weaving through the water like threads of light. They were gentler giants, yes, but they carried the echo of their ancestors' fury in their bones. Mark frowned. But if Basilosaurus was so perfectly adapted, why didn't it survive? Why did everything after it get softer? Because perfection is a trap. Voss knelt, tracing the fossil's vestigial hips. This creature was too good at being a monster. When the world shifted, it had no room to change. But the whales that followed? They kept possibilities alive. She pulled out her tablet, pulling up a comparison. Basilosaurus's jagged teeth beside the baleen plates of a humpback. Evolution doesn't care about kings. It cares about options. The lesson hummed in the silence between them. Basilosaurus had been the apex of its age, but its very specialization had been its downfall. The modern ocean belonged to creatures that could adapt. Whales that could switch from fish to krill. Dolphins that could learn new hunting tricks. Orcas that could forge cultures. Mark exhaled. So extinction isn't just about weakness. It's about inflexibility. Voss nodded. And survival isn't about strength. It's about resilience. The desert stretched around them, a graveyard of lost worlds. Somewhere beneath their feet, the bones of other fallen kings lay buried, creatures that had once ruled unchallenged, only to vanish when the rules changed. But Basilosaurus's story didn't end in the sand. Voss turned toward the horizon, where the real ocean waited. Out there, in the blue vastness, its descendants still swam, living proof that even the mightiest monsters could leave a legacy greater than themselves. The water never forgets, she murmured. And in the depths, the whales sang back.